Hello. They've improved the intro since I was here 6 years ago, haven't they? It was just one slide before and there was none of that music or anything. Thanks for coming. I always have this fear that it's going to be an empty room, so it's nice that it's not. Yeah, what are we going to talk about? Cybersecurity. I'll tell you some stories, and I suppose there might be some lessons learned at the end, but mainly it's a story, so thanks for coming. That's me. You don't need to know too much about me. I did come to Belgium for this conference 2018 and 2019. I work with this company called Foro. If you're interested in some cybersecurity consultancy, come and see me afterwards, but don't feel like you have to. Yeah, so I saw this on the way over on the Eurostar train. I'm really pleased that they told me not to flush my rubber ducks down the toilet, because, you know, if it wasn't for that sign, I might have done. I love Antwerp for its multi-story railway station. It blows my mind every time I come here. I have got a photo of the outside of the station when it was lit up. I don't know if that's a normal thing or whether it was just a few years back. It was all multicoloured, but I couldn't find it. Last time I was in Antwerp, they put me in room 101. I thought the hotels in Antwerp were trying to say something to me at that point. But this time, they told me to go to room 403, and I saw this sign. Do I go left or do I go right? And then I tried right, and I thought, well, there's no numbers on the doors. Or do I just have to guess which one to go to? But then I looked closer. Turned out they put the numbers on the floor. So if you ever go to that hotel, look at the floor. I mean, what? Why? This was me last time. More people then. Where have you all gone? But, you know, that was a long time ago. I would say I had more hair then, but I didn't. This hasn't changed about Antwerp. I love that graffiti thing and the skate park when you walk here from the city. And actually, I find that view strangely beautiful out onto the docks. What has changed, I noticed there's a load of scooters and there's a load of motorbikes and people riding bikes on the pavement, which is not something we would have in the UK. And when I was like walking on that pavement, it kind of reminded me of this. This is how I felt. It was like that. It blew my mind and I was genuinely scared because it was dark. That's Chennai, by the way. Just thought I'd use that photo. Anyway, let's get back to what we're going to talk about today. Oh, we don't need to see all those again, do we? Didn't expect it to do that. I just saw this in the paper today, in the Times. 1 in 3 workers have called in sick because of a hangover. Only 1 in 3? Really? Right, so let's talk about some semi-serious stuff. Quick quiz. Does anybody know what those 4 things have in common? Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the Bank of Bangladesh, Sky Mavis, which is a computer game developer, and Bybit. You might be able to guess from the title of the talk. Those are, as far as I could tell when I put these slides together a couple of months ago, the 4 biggest ever robberies by value. Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston was a load of paintings, some of which have been recovered, most of which probably won't be. Bank of Bangladesh was $1 billion US, up to Bybit, which was about $1.5 billion at the time, but it's probably worth more than that now. So I'm going to talk about how these robberies went down, or a couple of them, and what happened afterwards, and at the end, how they should have been stopped. Everybody knows what Bitcoin is, right? So it's been around since, 2008? So what's it for? Well, they said it was a new currency. It's trying to be, so you're not tied to fiat currencies. It was talk of privacy, but I'll come back to that later. This was the Bitcoin price the last time I did this talk in the summer back in May. So 72,000 GBP. This is the Bitcoin price today, 90,000. So if you'd have just bought some in May, you'd have made £18,000, you know, like however much that profit is. What's that, 20%? Something like that. This is its price over a number of years. And you can see that it's going up and up, but it is pretty volatile as a holding, but the general trend is upwards. Now, the significance of that date, 18th of November 2017, is when a colleague that I had, or a couple of colleagues in a company I was working for, had all invested in Bitcoin, and they urged me, they said, if you've got any spare cash, put it in Bitcoin. So you can see that at that point, I could have bought it for £5,800 per Bitcoin. Now it's 90,000. So you can do the maths on how much money I would have made, and you can work out whether or not I invested by the fact that my mortgage still cost the same as it did then. Damn. So it might be a massive financial bubble or a Ponzi scheme. A lot of talk of it is the blockchains are an environmental disaster. I went to a talk a few years ago about how much power went into every single transaction. Some say it's a facilitator of organized crime, and I'm definitely going to talk about that. One quick side note, non-fungible tokens. Has anybody heard of them? Probably, yeah. There's an interesting article. Damien Hirst, the British artist, burnt his own artwork after selling NFTs that reference that artwork. That's my understanding of what he did. NFTs come back in later because the Axie Infinity hack was kind of to do with NFTs. The whole game was. Anyway, who's heard of the Lazarus Group? Okay, I would expect a tech audience, at least some of them, to have heard of the Lazarus Group. They are the North Korean, not the South Korean, state-run APT. Most of the big cybercrime, or a lot of the big cybercrime, is done by them. The North Korean government is obviously locked out of the global economy. So to get their money for their whatever they want to do with it, I'm not going to go down that route. I'm not here to talk about politics. They get it through cybercrime. They were responsible for various hacks. You'll notice 3 of them were on my earlier slide there. WannaCry ransomware is interesting, actually. If you read about that, most people would say that was accidentally released early, had an off switch in it, and that's how it was eventually stopped. This is something I pulled out of the Times. You can tell which paper I read. So North Korea is the 3rd largest Bitcoin holder in the world after the US government and the UK government. When I checked this morning, the US government holds over $20 billion of Bitcoin, which my understanding is most of that is seized from proceeds of crime, and it's kind of locked up. There was an interesting article this week, actually. There was a fraud in China. The Chinese woman responsible for it, she fled to the UK. She's been arrested. She was subject to what do they call it, proceeds of crime thing. And when she was arrested a few years ago, the proceeds of her crime were worth like 100 million, and now a billion or so. Now it's worth about 5 billion. The UK government is arguing that we can confiscate it, apparently. So that all sounds a bit desperate. The interesting thing is she defrauded a load of people for far less money than that. So it would be possible to pay back all the people she defrauded in the original fiat currency that she defrauded them for, and there'd still be a ton of money left over. Okay, so that's Bitcoin, that's the Lazarus Group. I've got to say, some of the Lazarus Group hacks are brilliant in terms of technical and what they get up to. That's probably why I'm talking now about it. Who's heard of Axie Infinity? Anybody? No? Okay. It's a game which I'll come on to. First, a word about in-game economies. My children used to play blocks, what's it called? Roblox. And it's got an in-game economy. You can buy stuff and you can trade it to other people, and it has an in-game currency called Robux, but it's not a real currency, right? So you can only buy in-game stuff with it. So you can buy and sell stuff in that currency, but it's a one-way thing. And developers have always been annoyed by this. Players, not developers. I'm sure the developers aren't annoyed. You can buy the currency with real money, but you can't convert the currency back out to real money. And I suspect there might be regulatory reasons for that. And therefore, a lot of games have like a an economy on the side, like a black economy. So people go and trade their stuff, their in-game assets, for real money outside, and there are frauds associated with various games. I've listened to podcasts, where developers or I guess hackers talk about how they've monetized these various games, by hacking them, by stealing people's assets. It's big business. So Axie Infinity was a game developed by Sky Mavis. At one point, it was the most widely played game in the world. According to what I read, it went massive during the lockdowns in the Far East. It sounds like a game a bit like the Pokemon type things. You breed these things and you fight them, and then they get more powerful, and so on and so on. Now, to get around there being a black economy on the side of their game, they decided to make their game in-game economy based on the Ethereum blockchain. So they allowed all the players to trade their stuff in Ethereum, and they took a cut. So, 4.25% fee for trading these Axies, these monster things that you build in the game. The problem with trading via Ethereum was that Ethereum trades are very slow. When you put something onto the Ethereum blockchain, it can take minutes or even half an hour I'm told at times for the trade to complete. And they needed it to be real time, right? In order for it to work in the game. So what they did was they did something called a side chain, which is effectively, it's another blockchain which is on the side of the Ethereum chain. And what happens is it records its own transactions on its blockchain, and then it syncs back to the actual Ethereum blockchain, at which point they're committed to the world, right? So they built something called the Ronin bridge to act as like a bridge, a translator, I guess, from their own blockchain to the Ethereum blockchain. And you might be wondering where the vulnerability is, and that's probably where it lies. So, Tornado Cash. We'll come back to the Axie Infinity hack because it is pretty cool. Who's heard of Tornado Cash? Anybody? Yeah, a few people. Now, this is a cryptocurrency mixer. Now, the point about cryptocurrency is it does not have privacy. The blockchains are all public. You can see every single transaction, which actually makes it quite hard to... You might have thought that, okay, criminals get, say, ransomware, they get the proceeds in Bitcoin. That's easy to launder. It's not, because these days, in order to legitimately trade, either buy or sell cryptocurrencies, you've got to go through a crypto exchange, and they have to do KYC, know your customer stuff. So effectively, unless you are in a jurisdiction such as, say, Russia, that is kind of aside from the global economy, you cannot launder cryptocurrency easily. So if you're in America, if you're in anywhere in Europe, most countries in the world, laundering cryptocurrency is hard. So the idea with a cryptocurrency mixer for criminal purposes is you set up a smart contract. I'll come back to smart contracts. You deposit your Bitcoin into the mixer. It then tumbles it, mixes it with a load of other Bitcoin, and then it comes out the other side. So the blockchain will show a transaction of somebody putting whatever into the mixer, and then on the other side it comes out. So now that breaks the audit chain. Now, Tornado Cash, I believe, was not set up as a criminal endeavor. Tornado Cash was set up by those three people. They set it up as a DAO, a Decentralised Autonomous Organisation. And what that is, this is something I've been reading a lot about. I was hoping to have set one up and created some smart contracts to actually demonstrate them, but unfortunately it turned out to be a lot more complex than I expected. It's a bit like when I talked about quantum computing 6 years ago. I was like, how hard can it be? It was hard. I had to learn quantum mechanics to do that one. I didn't have to learn quantum mechanics here, but anyway. So I'm afraid I don't have a demonstration. But a DAO, a Decentralised Autonomous Organisation, the idea is you can set up an organisation on the blockchain. The Ethereum blockchain was, this was an improvement over the Bitcoin blockchain. Can't do this on the Bitcoin blockchain. So you can set up stuff with smart contracts that effectively define how a business works. So the Tornado Cash was set up by these three people. It is smart contract that just runs in perpetuity. Nobody manages the business. There's nobody there. Those three are not taking any money out of the business. So it is autonomous. And they believed, although we'll come back to this, that by setting it up in that way, that they're removed from it. So anybody using it couldn't, they were open about it. They said, this is, yeah, it's there. It's a privacy tool. And many people did and do use Tornado Cash as a privacy tool. So for example, some people, quite rightly, are fearful that they don't want their financial transactions monitored. So you might say, well, okay, some shops accept Bitcoin now, right, for stuff. And apparently more and more places are accepting Bitcoin. You pay by Bitcoin is traceable because of the blockchain. So it's even more traceable probably than using a credit card. Certainly more traceable than cash. Well, I suppose cash might have a fingerprint on it. So the idea with a crypto mixer here is obvious. If I buy a cup of coffee, if I pay with my bank card, someone knows where I was at that day, at that time. It would be easy to find that out. Not so if you pay with cryptocurrency via a mixer, because that transaction will just show that somebody handed over €4 or whatever worth of Bitcoin. 0.00000 whatever Bitcoin. So that was, I believe, the reason for Tornado Cash. Of course, people might have ended up using it to launder money, which we'll come back to. Okay, smart contracts. I think I mentioned these already. The idea with a smart contract is you set it up to execute with initial conditions, and then when someone can then execute the smart contract. So they're not legally binding, apparently, but it is code that is waiting to execute on the blockchain. Anybody can see it again. You can look at the code and you can see how it's going to execute. So you can use it to define a DAO, an organization. You can use it to define a transaction between people. So, I mean, in the UK, I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world. When we buy and sell houses, they have this thing called exchanging contracts, right? And solicitors have to, I don't know how they do it, but I always had this image in the old days of solicitors sort of standing like that and like grabbing one contract and swapping it. But it all happens in the same day, and there'll be a big chain of property transactions, and they can fall through because something went wrong in the chain. So you can see that you could set something like that up with these smart contracts, and then as soon as the person at the bottom of the chain transferred their money, it could go bang, 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 and happen straight on the blockchain like that. So possibilities are endless with smart contracts. I have started writing some, as I say, but unfortunately, I'm not a good enough software developer anymore. Haven't done proper software development for years. Interestingly, when I started researching Ethereum, the Ethereum itself is set up via smart contracts. People say there was an Ethereum hack back in, I think it was 2020. It wasn't actually a hack. Somebody found kind of like an unexpected code path in the smart contracts and managed to get a load of Ethereum transferred to themselves, which is all on the blockchain. And apparently that sent Ethereum into a bit of a meltdown, and their solution, it wasn't a crime. So could they recover the funds? And what they did was they hard forked the Ethereum code base to recover the funds effectively, which I read was very, very controversial. This book, it says blockchain for dummies. By the way, I do recommend it, but it ain't for dummies. Within the first couple of pages, you're like, this is not like Excel for Dummies that I remember like 30 years ago. It's a very different animal. It's really good. It's what I was using for my primary way of learning how to do these things. I actually left my other computer behind in the UK that I access my stuff from, because I don't use this computer because I browse the web and I do stuff on it. And I realized pretty quickly, if I'm going to be starting to do things involving blockchains and so on, I shouldn't be also browsing the web from that computer. You would think other people would learn that lesson. We'll come back to that. Okay, let's talk about cybercrime. This is the cool stuff. Any crime, not just a cybercrime, you need to gather data. So I guess in the old days, that would be recon on the warehouse you're going to rob at gunpoint. You need to carry out the plan, right? So whatever that means. And you need to cash out. And the most important and probably the hardest part is cashing out. It's one thing, robbing a bank. How do you spend the money, right? Even harder, think back to the robbery at that gallery in New York. You can't sell a painting, right? You can't sell a Picasso painting. Everybody knows what it looks like. So I've read that those artworks that go missing for decades, apparently they end up being kind of like IOUs in the criminal underworld. So I've got a Picasso, which is probably worth, say, £100 million or something. If I owe somebody else some money for, I don't know, big drug deal or something, apparently these paintings get exchanged as like sort of tokens of IOU type things. That's how they're used, which is a great shame. I wish people would stop stealing paintings. So money laundering. This was an interesting story. A few weeks ago in the UK, I saw it on the morning news. There are loads of barbershops all over the UK, apparently. And I did notice, someone had commented to me a few weeks earlier, why are there so many barbershops? I've got a friend who's obsessed by little burger vans that pop up in car parks, like this sort of car park. He always says to me, that's a drug dealer. It's a front for a drug dealer. And I suspect he's probably right. Because you see these burger vans that nobody ever buys anything from them. So how the hell is it still there 20 years later? And apparently, all these barbershops in the UK were money laundering fronts. And everybody's seen Breaking Bad, right? And the traditional way of laundering money would be to have a business that exchanges cash, right? And then just inflate the takings. And apparently what the NCA in the UK was doing was, you've got a barber shop. They were actually observing them and saying, well, we've noticed that this week you've actually cut 3 people's hair and yet your takings are £10,000. How does that happen, sir? So a load of barbershops got shut down. Casinos is actually a good way to launder money, and the Bank of Bangladesh hack proceeds were laundered via a casino. They basically went into had a private room in a casino in Manila, exchanged a load of cash for chips. Then they played Baccarat, which is, I've never played Baccarat, I don't know how you play it, but apparently that is the least in favor of the house game that's played in casinos. The house has 51% chance of winning, you have 49%. So they were paying like money mills effectively to exchange the funds for chips, play Baccarat all day, lose a very little amount of money. So they would basically gamble $100,000, walk out with $95,000. And because you've got them from the casino, the money's laundered. Now you can show a receipt. Yeah, I won $95,000 in a casino. Bitcoin and crime. I think I've pretty much already covered all this. You can buy stuff online with it. I've never done this myself, but there's apparently a load of marketplaces where you can buy illegal stuff, usually via Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are available. You can't buy loads of things in the real world with it. This is the problem with it. If I do a crypto heist, I can't really go out and buy a Ferrari with it. I need to convert it back to fiat currency to do anything really useful. And as I said earlier, most jurisdictions will know who the money is going out to if you try and do that. If you try and cash out your Bitcoin into fiat currency, you've got to be identified. So it's hard to do. There is a Bitcoin cycle. and somebody sells some products online, so gets some Bitcoin in. Let's call him Danny Dealer. Danny Dealer can probably go to some sort of illegal backstreet exchange. These do exist, apparently, in America. They will give you cash. I don't know how they get around the KYC. I don't quite understand how it works. So Danny Dealer now has a load of cash. That cash goes to some sort of consolidator. In America, it will cross the border into Mexico, that cash having been put into big bricks. Danny Dealer obviously takes his living expenses away from it, but there's still a ton of cash left. Some more product gets bought. That's flour, by the way. Flour is very expensive in Mexico. And then the cycle continues. People buy those products. Don't know why people pay so much for flour and sugar, but there you go. So that's the Bitcoin cycle, and that works for low-level people. I've heard in America. Modern money laundering, yeah, it all comes down to almost all the big crimes we hear about now involve some sort of cryptocurrency, right? You've got ransomware, you get paid out in crypto, but more recently, ransomware is still massive. Just steal the crypto directly. That's what the Lazarus group do. You somehow need to break that chain of evidence on the blockchain in order to launder the money. So this is where Bitcoin mixers can come in. A lot of the money from the Bybit hack, something like $400 million worth, is kind of known about and can't move. So Lazarus is struggling to launder it. Even Lazarus Group is finding it hard to launder that much money. I don't know which agency it was that I read about, but it's in the notes to the slide, but I can't see it. They're struggling to launder the money, basically. It's just too much to do. Because if you put like 100 million into a crypto mixer, people are now there's that company Chainalysis that does blockchain analysis. They are now looking at what comes out of crypto mixers and can calculate, okay, so all these big transactions that went to these wallets here, they add up to the same as this deposit from Lazarus Group. So they're trying to rebuild the chain of custody, custody that's been broken by those mixers. So it's getting harder and harder. All right, let's talk about the actual heists. Bank of Bangladesh. Anybody heard of this robbery? You keep smiling at me when I mention these heists. You've probably read the same books that I have. So, Bank of Bangladesh. It had $1 billion in a bank account at the Bank of New York. That was that country's entire foreign currency reserves. They hacked into the SWIFT payment system. This is an absolutely amazing way they did this. The SWIFT was air-gapped in a room. They disabled the printer that was printing out the transactions. They got some sort of... There was reckoned to be an insider, but that insider was never found. They ordered the transfers over the weekend of Chinese New Year when nobody would be working in the Far East. Also happened to be a bank holiday in America, so that they knew that the Bank of America people wouldn't come back till the following Tuesday. So they had a 4-day window to carry out all these transfers. Everything was there. They transferred everything out. They were doing it in chunks into various places. Somebody in the Bank of New York apparently got on the phone and said, hey, Bangladesh, do you really want to be transferring all of your money out? But nobody answered the phone. So 80 million ended up in bank accounts in the Philippines. This is the stuff that was laundered through the casinos. But then everything else got stopped. Now, it was because the address of one of the target banks, I'm going to check my notes here because I can't remember what it was called. Hang on. The address of the target banks was Jupiter Street. This set off an alert because at the time there was a Jupiter bank which had been sanctioned. So the hackers were unlucky in that the address caused like a keyword alert, and that's why all the transactions were stopped. If it wasn't for that, they probably would have got away with all the money. So it actually only ended up costing, although it was $1 billion heist, they only got away with about 80 million. I say only, that's still a significant amount of money. So I'd recommend you read that one. You know, if you're interested in hacks, that's an amazing story. Bybit. Who's heard of Bybit? Cool. This was March of this year. A lot has been written and spoken about it. This is essentially what happened. So it was kind of a supply chain attack. A lot of attacks these days are supply chain attacks. There's a big attack going on with, what's it called, that CRM, Salesforce at the minute. It's often easier to attack a supply chain than it is to attack the end user. So they felt that there's a company called SafeWallet that writes software that interfaces with smart contracts. So Bybit was using, essentially Bybit is a crypto exchange. They held most of their funds in what you call cold wallets. So a crypto wallet that is literally not connected to your computer systems, or at least you would think it shouldn't be connected to your computer systems. So and then their actual transactional business is in hot wallets. So every now and again, they take money, they transfer it backwards and forwards from the hot wallet to the cold wallet to facilitate their business or to take profits out. So SafeWallet, it was based on smart contracts which required 5 votes. So the Ethereum smart contracts, generally speaking, go on a proof of stake type voting system. So I think there were 9 nodes in the no, hang on a minute. I'm talking about a different one. Forget that. I'll come back to that. So the SafeWallet was designed to transfer money backwards and forwards. They got access to SafeWallet at the time when I wrote these slides. It wasn't known how, but they believe it was a developer account somehow. Developer accounts have always got too much privilege. There was code there that generates the smart contract to do the transfer. They managed to modify that code in SafeWallet, but only for Bybit. So there was effectively an if statement that said, if it's Bybit, do this. So the hack, therefore, it didn't affect any other customers. They were definitely targeting Bybit. At first, it was thought, God, they got lucky. They released this thing into SafeWallet, and they happened to snare $1.5 billion. No, they were targeting Bybit. So what they did was they published a new smart contract onto the blockchain a few days before the hack, which essentially said transfer $1.5 billion out of the cold wallet into my Ethereum wallet. And when the actual contract, Bybit, went on, they have, I don't think I've got a slide showing it, the UI that they had to execute their smart contracts, and this is a weakness, that this is a type of exploit that's been used in Windows from time to time. It just has a massive churn of like what looks like tons and tons of code. And apparently it differed. You know, you'd have had to have scrolled down to see where they had changed it, and it was different by just a couple of characters. So it actually did the transfer that they were ordering, right? So what they'd set up on SafeWallet was a thing that said, right, the next time that Bybit does a transfer, do this tiny thing at the same time. So the Bybit people, I don't know, they're trying to transfer, say, 10 million or something normal from their cold wallet to their hot wallet. That transaction goes through, they can see it, they're like happy days. Meanwhile, in the background, they have triggered this other smart contract to steal $1.5 billion from them. It's really cool. As hacks go, it was, monster. So, yeah, the secret contract gets triggered, transferring $1.5 billion into the attacker's wallets. I use ChatGPT for these graphics, by the way. I'm terrible at drawing graphics. So how did they cash it out? So I sort of touched on this. The crypto mixers, the shady crypto exchanges, those things you can use. But the wallet-to-wallet transactions are visible. So some of them ends up in wallets which the world knows belongs to the Lazarus group. So there you go. As of March, 3% of the cash has been recovered. 400 million or so is untraceable. So I got that the wrong way around. So the rest, so over 1 billion, was still visible. So that's a running target. That's how hard they're finding to launder it. Yeah, they need to convert it effectively to US dollars to buy parts for agricultural machinery. Don't know exactly where they go for that, but there you go. Right, Axie Infinity heist. Yeah. This leads us right back to Tornado Cash. So, yep, the game was based on the Ethereum blockchain. Axies are NFTs. That's why I mentioned NFTs earlier. So your actual monster that you trade in the game is an NFT, a non-fungible token. Things take place on Ronin. The Ronin bridge collects the side chains. Yeah, the bridge was set up with 9 validators. So the developers, Axie, did not want to have all the voting power on the sidechain. They wanted to show that it was independently usable, right? So they had 4 nodes that could vote, and there were 5 other nodes. So in order for a transaction between effectively they were, like mass updates to go one way or t'other, they need 5 people to validate. So this was the vulnerability, right? How do we get hold of 5 votes so that we can steal everything was the problem for the hackers. So this is the way this one went down. So, and by the way, who in this room has received a job offer or an invitation to apply for a job from LinkedIn or something similar that is far too good to be true? Yeah, be very, very careful. A big initial access vector now, probably one of the biggest, is Lazarus and various other hackers, whoever, like, gangs. They will send people these, it's effectively a fish, come and apply for this job. We see you've got these skills. Then they'll get you to, here we go. So you do a couple of Zoom calls, and then they'll say, well, I want you to do a tech test. So just install this container, blah, blah, blah. That's how the malware gets on your computer, right? So if ever you're doing a job interview and they say, right, we want you to do a tech test, so install this container, it's all in there, be very, very careful. That is probably one of the biggest growing initial access vectors. And of course, probably all of us in this room, we have overprivileged accounts, right? If you can compromise a developer account, that's usually bingo time. Because very few companies have proper network segregation and PAM, least privilege implementations. So the unfortunate developer installs some malware. He does the tech test. Nobody knows if he got the job. I'm guessing not. And now the attackers have got, because they've pwned this guy, they've got 4 of the 9 votes that they need to do something on the chain. So how did they get the last vote? Well, happily for them. So they've pwned this developer. They were in the Axie network for quite some time, poking around trying to find stuff. And what should they find but an old developer cred? So who's in their life not cleaned up properly after a development effort? Yeah. So it's kind of a version of the old you didn't clean up your development flags problem that took down Knight Financial back in, 2017-ish. So there's a developer cred lying around. So they managed to find out what this cred was for. It's for one of the other voting nodes that they've installed the software around the world. That hasn't been cleaned up either. So Now they've got 5 votes, and they laugh all the way to the crypto bank. They've pwned their own in bridge. Well, I like the bridge graphic. Took me a few tries on ChatGPT saying, no, just make the bloke big and look evil over a bridge. So 625 million in Ethereum coin and USDC, which is like a crypto coin that's pegged to the dollar. So a lot of money. Not quite sure where all that money went, but what I do know is that it went to Tornado Cash, that DAO that we talked about at the start. So all of a sudden, Tornado Cash is under the microscope because the Lazarus Group did successfully launder a lot of this money. But as you can see there, June 2024, Sky Mavis recovered 5.7 million. Good job. Although they did make a hell of a lot of money out of the game, apparently. I couldn't find any other information about this money. So one has to assume that it was used to buy some tractors or something. So, and this might be the only bit of the talk that actually has anything useful in terms of missed opportunities. Where could these hacks have been stopped? I'm sure a lot of you would be thinking, as I do, when I read about these hacks, my God, why did they let that happen? Why did they let that happen? Obviously, cleaning up the developer creds would have been a good one. So here's top 5 lessons learned from these crypto heists. These apply to anything, right? Because whatever company all we work for in this room, we're all vulnerable to ransomware, right? Everything starts from initial access. Initial access almost always starts from some sort of phish. We are high-value targets because we're all developers, right? Well, I assume, well, you probably are, I'm not. On my current job, they gave me admin accounts for everything, and I said, no, I don't need those. Just give me access to Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So, lesson number 1, implement role-specific training. This is something we're doing at the bank that we consult into. It's very powerful and it can be fun. So, strongly advise it. You know, the developers need to know how to be safe, right? So that's lesson number 1. And as I say, you will be targeted by social engineering campaigns. If you update your CV and say you work on, I did this as an experiment, say you work on blockchain code, you'll get loads of dodgy people contacting you. So look out for that. Clean up. So this means developer creds. There was a massive Microsoft hack at the end of 2022, was it? What did they call it? Eternal Blue? Or maybe that was an earlier one, I can't remember. But it was a Chinese hack. And that all went down because they didn't clean up development servers, right? And the way that if you have a Windows network, an Active Directory network in your organization, lateral movement is pretty easy. You know, Windows is not very good at cleaning itself up. You know, there's an ancient hack called Mimikatz, which just looked at password files. And, you know, if you've logged on to something, there'll probably be a stealable token somewhere. So this is why you should be using time-based tokens and last-minute privilege elevation, things like that. Number 3, if you sacrifice security for convenience, you know, take note of the compensating controls you've put in place, right? I've seen a lot of companies not do this, right? I even had a CTO once who said, I said, no, I don't want to do that. That is madness. And he said, well, just get the CEO to accept the risk. And I said, well, that doesn't make it less risky. That makes it more risky because he hasn't got a clue. So, you know, monitor the compensating controls, review them, and so on. Has anybody done threat modeling exercises? Yeah, cool. They can be good fun. We've just been implementing a program of that based on MITRE ATT&CK. We found a load of gaps. Yeah, and one of the big things you can do, everybody's got vulnerability management tools. You can get them to just sniff out keys that are lying around on the network, right? So it's a simple thing to do. It'll help you clean stuff up. 2 more for good measure. Segment your developer's production access, right? So what I mean by that is, do we really need access to production? But I guess most of us probably do have it. I don't think we do. If we do, you should put it as have some sort of Privesk type app that does it. CyberArk do a Privesk app. Everybody does now, so that you can get a privilege, use it, and then not have it. So that if someone pwns your account, it can't actually do anything without going through another MFA challenge to get a permission to do something, right? That's one of the biggest security things you can do. Yeah, be aware of what you install. I think I've said this quite a few times. And we've got all sorts of alerts set up to do this. You know, you can configure all your EDRs, EDXs to look for all that stuff. Okay, that's the lesson part. So if you wanted anything useful, it's done. So what happened to all that money from Axie? What happened to Tornado Cash? So they tried to arrest people, but there was no one to arrest because Tornado Cash is a DAO. They argued, the American authorities, that intention doesn't matter in this case. They must have known their thing was going to be used to launder funds, which I find to be a strange argument from American authorities because I haven't seen them arresting gun makers recently. But nonetheless, they have actively pursued the writers of Tornado Cash. Yeah, they're trying to effectively to bring all these crypto assets under regulation like everything else. There was an interesting side story. They sanctioned Tornado Cash. So anybody dealing with receiving funds from or sending funds to Tornado Cash was therefore committing a crime in America because they'd sanctioned it. So somebody, it's not known who, deposited $50,000 worth of stuff into Tornado Cash and then transferred it out to a load of high-profile celebrities in America, thereby making all of those high-profile celebrities in breach of the sanctions against Tornado Cash. I don't think any of them got arrested. I don't know why I picked out Jimmy Fallon. Frankly, I don't even know who Jimmy Fallon is. Maybe he was, well, I don't know. But Jimmy Fallon and Shaquille O'Neal were amongst those who received the payments. Those are the 3 people that made Tornado Cash. Pertsev was arrested in the Netherlands. Semenyov has been indicted by the US government, but he's believed to be in Russia, so he's never going to get arrested. Well, I suppose there might be regime change in Russia, but as things stand, he's pretty safe from that indictment. Roman Storm was arrested and is in prison in the USA. These are the updates. Pertsev's appealing against the conviction. Semenyov is still under the radar. Roman Storm has gone to trial. He was convicted in August, so just a couple of months ago, of conspiring to operate an unlicensed money transmitting operation, but the 2 other more serious charges couldn't be proven, so they might retry him for those, but apparently that's all on pause because I read this morning that he's appealing his conviction. The US government is not going to pursue the other charges until that appeal is heard or something like that. But he's still in prison. So that's where they all are now, which I find a little bit unfair, but then I'm not the authorities, so there you go. Why should we care about this? So a few years ago, if you'd have asked me about privacy, I would have been of the opinion, and by the way, the UK apparently has more CCTV cameras per head of population than any country in the world, even more than Russia, so I'm told. Mind you, that's a bigger place. A few years ago, I'd have said, well, if you've got nothing to hide, why would you care about privacy, right? I'm not so sure about that now. The world is changing around us. Now, in February of this year, the UK government asked Apple to build a backdoor into iPhones so that they could get hold of information. Apple effectively refused to do that. And there was a bit of a standoff. Apple withdrew a feature called advanced data protection from UK iPhones as a result. They said, we are not giving you a backdoor, so we're switching off the feature. So iPhones are now less secure in the UK than they used to be because our government asked for backdoors. But cash is being phased out everywhere. So all our transactions are going to be recordable, right? They're going to be visible. So if you can't use a small-time crypto mixer, right, very soon, you will not be able to buy or sell anything anonymously. Well, except by going into the black economy. There have been various secure phones like Phantom Secure and so on. I read a really good book about them called Darkwire. They're pretty much illegal everywhere in the world, right? And increasing numbers of countries are actually making end-to-end encryption illegal. Most of the Far East, you can't use encrypted messaging apps, even. So should we care? I kind of feel like we should, because as I say, the world is getting more authoritarian. If you read anything about American politics, Donald Trump is bypassing the legislature constantly. The American president is allowed to make presidential declarations. They're called executive orders, but only in national emergencies. He's abusing, or, well, in my view, many people's view, is abusing that to do a lot of stuff that he shouldn't do. Anybody heard of Chris Krebs? So he's founded, or he was one of the founders of Sentinel-1. He worked for the government. He wrote the report during the Biden administration that cleared the previous election of any kind of dirty tricks, any kind of hacks. Well, they've effectively arrested him and stopped him from working. He had to give up his jobs in Sentinel-1. They withdrew his security clearance and so on. And in the UK, we're getting more and more authoritarian people like Reform UK. So I think we should care about DAOs and we should care about things like Tornado Cash, and somehow we should be advocating for them. And that's all from me. Those are my primary sources, as well as the book I mentioned earlier. I thoroughly recommend them. The Darknet Diaries podcast is great. If you don't listen to it, I recommend you go on there. There's about 120 episodes. They're all brilliant. I ordered a Darknet Diaries t-shirt, but it hasn't arrived yet, so I'm wearing this t-shirt instead. So thanks very much for listening.